States, particularly the past week in Boston, and the latest from the Canadian press on the investigation, the manhunt in the Boston Marathon bombing. The Obama administration has a range of legal options to consider in the prosecution of the remaining Boston Marathon bombing suspect. They include whether to seek the death penalty for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who is recovering from wounds in hospital. When he is able to speak, investigators plan to question the 19-year-old without informing him of his legal rights to remain silent and have an attorney present. They say public safety justifies overriding his legal rights. Of course, authorities captured Dzhokhar Tsarnaev yesterday. I don't know if you've seen it was very interesting, the police infrared shots from their helicopter looking down at a boat on a boat trailer at a property in the Boston area where he was lying apparently bleeding from gunshot wounds suffered in the gun battle with police the night before that had seen a police officer killed, another seriously injured, his brother killed, and still so many questions about if these two were in fact the perpetrators, as the authorities allege. What drove them? What exactly was behind their desire to cause this kind of death and destruction at an event like the Boston Marathon, where, of course, 3 people were killed in that bombing, dozens injured. One of the victims, of course, an 8-year-old boy, and that chilling picture of one of the 2 suspects allegedly there planting the bomb with the 8-year-old victim just a few feet away. Just an amazing, incredible, and disturbing story over the last number of days. Max Abrahms is a terrorism expert and fellow at Johns Hopkins University and joins me now. Mr. Abrahms, hello. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Thank you for coming on. What is first of all, what is your takeaway? What has sort of been your main point of interest in what's happened over the past week?
Well, I mean, I want to pick up on something that you just said, which is really the million-dollar question of what are the motives of the perpetrators. The initial step was to find out who are the perpetrators, and now that we seem to have done that, we want to know why they did what they did. And in terrorism generally, it's very often hard to ascertain the motives of the perpetrators. And that's because, in theory, terrorism is a political tool. It's a tool for weaker parties to pressure governments into making political concessions. And yet, if you think about it, terrorism doesn't really work politically. When a country's civilians are attacked, the government tends not to want to enter into negotiation with the perpetrators. Rather, it digs in its political heels and tries to snuff out the perpetrators. And so this is a very common question then about why, are these people irrational, or what is their incentive structure? What were they trying to achieve?
Yes.
So right now, I think that there are a number of possibilities. The uncle, you may have seen, said that his nephews were essentially losers.
Yeah, he called them losers.
He said that they were losers, that they were social outcasts, and that they never really fully integrated into American society. Increasingly, we're learning that the older brother had stronger ties than the younger brother with political Islam. So I think he was more involved in sort of jihadist chat rooms. We know that the older brother spent some time recently between January and July in Russia. And one of the main questions that I want to know is, what was he doing on that trip? Because it certainly correlated with what appears to be increased radicalization on his part.
Yes, but what could they hope to achieve, Mr. Abrahms, by blowing up innocent people at a fun event like the Boston Marathon? Why would that,
From a purely political perspective, it's incomprehensible to me. When you think about it, the Boston Marathon is not just a national event. There were 96 different countries represented that day. So for them to attack such a group they obviously weren't that discriminate in their target selection, in the sense that there was a very good chance that they would be killing some non-Americans as they did.
Yes, Chinese national.
If the goal were Chechen independence, and we haven't seen strong enough evidence to believe that to be true, but if that were the goal, then terrorism would be counterproductive, because what's going to happen now is Vladimir Putin is going to have a stronger hand to crush Chechen dissidents. I think the Obama administration is going to see the Chechen terrorists as common enemies. And I think that, right now we're sort of at a nadir in terms of the U.S.-Russian strategic relationship.
Sure.
But I think that this terrorist event will draw the two countries closer, particularly in the context of combating Chechens.
Yet,
it's deeply counterproductive.
I agree. And many people will be sitting here wondering, well, what in the hell does Chechen independence have to do with the United States and the Boston Marathon? I mean, what could they have hoped to achieve if their goal was an independent Chechnya?
The target selection of terrorists is very often opportunistic. Some of the participants in the 9/11 attacks, according to the 9/11 Commission, actually wanted to go into Chechnya and fight the Russians. But the paperwork was too difficult, so they ended up coming to the United States. And so I just used that story to illustrate how opportunistic their target selection is. I think that if these unhappy people were at the London Marathon, they may have done the same thing. If they could have gotten access to Russian targets, I think they would have done the same thing. I think that that people tend to overestimate the intelligence and sophistication of terrorists. I think that almost always they're very simple people who haven't clearly thought out the relationship between means and ends. That is, how their actions will further their objectives. And I think that this case is consistent with that.
Max Abrahms is my guest, and we're going to take a break. Mr. Abrahms will stay with me. I do welcome your calls, comments, questions on what happened in Boston this past week at 604-280-9898, star 9898 on your cell phone. So many aspects to this story, and we're going to stick with this for the next half hour or so to talk about as well the reaction in Boston and in the United States to this. But Mr. Abrahms is going to stick with me. We'll talk about terrorism in general, international terrorism versus domestic terrorism, which is actually more damaging. And we do welcome your calls. We'll be back after a break here on CKNW News Talk 980.
Tonight at 9, CKNW presents Sports Talk.
States, particularly